Excellent. Thanks, Claire. So welcome, everybody. And I would like to recognize that we are collectively on the unceded territories of all the First Nations. And for me, that's the Shtutliam within our regional boundaries. So that would also include the Lillooet Nation and the Lower Shtutliam. And for that, we are grateful. And I also need to actually read out. Is this the correct spot where I could read out this? Okay.
Thank you.
So there is a electronic meetings policy, and this requires me to read this out at the beginning of the meeting for everyone to hear. So I will do that now. It's a page, so bear with me. This committee meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Any comments made during this meeting will form part of the public record. Public viewing of the meeting is also available in the SLRD boardroom in Pemberton. The meeting is being held virtually with some or all of meeting participants attending by electronic or communication facilities. Section A, committee members will be involved in and participate in the meeting. B, committee members will raise their hands to advise the chair they wish to speak. The chair will record the order in which the hands are raised and will allow the committee members to speak in the order in which they are recorded. If the committee members are unable to raise their hands due to being in audio mode, they will verbally advise the chair of their intention to speak. C, all meeting attendees should remain muted when not speaking. D, with respect to a vote, committee members are only required to state a nay vote, i.e. members are not required to voice a yay vote. E, committee members attending the meeting are required to verbally advise the chair or the staff liaison if they leave the meeting and when they return to the meeting, so that this can be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. F, committee members will email the staff liaison if they have a technical difficulty with their connection and need to be reconnected to the meeting. G, if a technical difficulty occurs resulting in the meeting not being projected on the wall display in the SLRD boardroom, the meeting will recess until the projection is reestablished. So we need to stop it. If a technical difficulty occurs and it becomes apparent that a committee member has become disconnected from the meeting and the meeting's quorum is not maintained, the meeting will be recessed until the committee member returns to the meeting. I, committee members who are attending electronically and declare a conflict of interest in respect of an agenda item will be placed in the virtual waiting room by the staff liaison while the committee considers the agenda item. And lastly, J, committee members who are present within the virtual waiting room are asked to stay at their computer or otherwise remain present and connected to their computer so as not to miss their readmittance to the virtual meeting room following consideration of the agenda item. Okay, thank you. That's long. Hopefully we could provide that in a different way so I didn't have to read that out every time. But thank you for your patience on that. I would like to go on to review and approval of the agenda and the minutes. So we will come to an agenda item lower down and talk about which part of the agenda we will look at to review the bylaw. But I would like to review the agenda now, and if there is any changes, additions, if you could voice them now. Hearing none. I don't know if I waited long enough. Counting a little more seconds, it might be 17 or something like that. If anyone's comfortable putting forward a motion to accept the agenda.
This is Rolf. I'll move to accept the agenda.
Okay, I will thank you, Rolf. I will accept that, and I will, Vivian, will you second that then? You put up your hand as well. Great. Any objections to approval of the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we will carry on. And I would like to do the review and approval of the minutes from December 2nd, 2021. Any additions or changes necessary for these? We had a chance to look at them, so that was good. Okay, hearing none, could we have a motion to accept the agenda from December 2nd? Sorry, the approval of the minutes for December 2nd?
Yeah, I move to approve them.
Thanks, Sarah. And a seconder?
I'll second.
It's a little bit hard. Okay, thanks, Stefan. And any objections? Great. Okay, thank you very much. So moving on to business arising from the minutes. Claire, just to go through, we'll go through these quickly and then move on to the next. Okay, great. Next section. So the action for me to connect with the Statlium for the potential for joint food and agriculture update meeting. I have prepared a draft letter, and at this point, so Claire has put it on letterhead. It is specifically to the Hawklip community, because I found out there's two things actually now that I know that they're happening. There's a youth project with, and they're growing greens, and the other is a food sustainability project. So would the committee like to see my letter before it goes out? Are you okay with it being reviewed by staff and myself? It's just a request to Chief and Council to invite the staff to come to our meeting. All right. I'm going to say silence as you, oh, go ahead, Vivian. And Vivian, and then.
Well, I saw the draft and I think that it's a very good letter, and I think you should share it with the committee just so they can appreciate it.
And Sue?
That sounds great. I like Vivian's suggestion, just so that we can see it. I'm sorry, why is it only going to Hawklip again?
So far, that's the only letter I've written. And so it was the first one of the projects that I had promised that I was connecting with. I haven't reached out to any other communities yet.
Okay, but the intention is to reach out to other communities?
Says, yeah, connect with Statlium. So this
Okay.
is the only progress I've made on this action item.
Oh, good work.
All right. Okay, that was an so to add on to that action is the letter will be sent to the rest of the committee prior to being sent. We need a motion for that, or can it just be an action added on to here?
I think that's fine. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Okay, now any other questions or things for that particular action? And please feel free to send, if anybody else hears of specific things that communities are doing, please feel free to send them to Claire and I so that we can follow up. Okay, so the action regarding LAFs to explore capacity to facilitate or coordinate the first wildlife agriculture meeting. I know we have Sarah on the line, but we actually also have Will from agriculture. So I would like to hear from both actually on this action, if you guys could speak to it. And Sarah, maybe yeah, I don't know. Anyways, there's might be some updates on LAFs to give, but let's just speak to this wildlife agriculture first. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I haven't moved forward on this. I'm going to be resigning at the end of my contract in March as the executive director of LAFs. And therefore there's a couple things that I've just kind of been hoping to hand over, like we were hoping like sooner rather than later, and then have a transition period. And I would say that's one of the things that I would kind of like to facilitate with a new ED if possible. And so far we haven't hired anyone new, but we're still interviewing and hoping we'll find someone before the end of March.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. Now I know in the past, wildlife agriculture conflict stuff has been, well, in the much distance past, has been led by Ministry of Ag. And I just wonder if anything, is there any capacity, Will, in your world do something like this?
I'd be interested to be involved in some of this discussion, but I know a lot of the wildlife interactions when we're looking at like a damage and an insurance basis, it's all handled through our business risk management branch. That's the unit within the ministry that deals with the crop insurance across the spectrum.
For sure.
I have had some
For sure.
inquiries, not necessarily coming out of the SLRD, but within the TNRD about wildlife protection and support for that, mostly for stackyards. But that's not something the ministry right now is supporting with any programs.
Well, at this point, it's been on, so in our agriculture plan, it's one of the action items in the plan. And I'm personally not, like, I know that there's been in the past there's been things to do with wolves, and now we have a lot of fencing going up. So we have deer, and in town in Lillooet, there's quite a lot of deer. So there are issues out there, but we really haven't heard from the agriculture community specifically as to what they're dealing with right now. So it's mostly just a hosting of a initial discussion and then finding out future needs and resources. I don't think it's like so it basically it's just having that first conversation to find out what's happening here and if there's a future need for ongoing meetings. And like I said, agriculture has hosted those in the past, but we had identified that LAFS could also be a host for that. And Sue, I acknowledge that you have your hand up for sure. Did you want to just quickly respond to that, Will, or?
Yeah, I guess if it's something the ministry's done before, I can help with that. I guess it's a new aspect to me, but then with everything that's gone on, and I'm in the big picture still relatively new in this role. So yeah, I'm certainly interested in helping out. And if we need to connect, I think if you can identify some issues, it makes it a lot easier to try and find solutions. So that could be a good first step, as you said.
Yeah, like I said, it's just basically hosting the meeting. So Sue, go ahead.
Thanks, Jackie. I was just, so can't the AAC host this thing? Do we have the capacity to host it? That was one question. And then the other one is just an information piece that Shucklewash is moving forward with a grizzly bear recovery plan for Stein to Hatlatch, which has the potential, of course, to impact agriculture. So it's an awareness and education piece that should be included in any kind of wildlife meeting going forward.
Okay, just to respond to the capacity for our group to do that, I wonder if it's just a little bit outside our role and our roles, because at this point, yeah, tell me, Claire, whether this is something that, I mean, identified on the plan. I think it was LAFS and potentially Ministry of Agriculture, maybe the COs, not necessarily our. So let me know what you think.
Yeah, Jackie, I think that's probably fair. Just in thinking about the sort of terms of reference for the AAC, and that the role is really to respond to information coming from the board. And so, if this came about through the board, maybe it's something that we could look to host. As you mentioned, in the ag plan, it's action for not for the AAC or the SLRD to take on. That would be, I think either LAFS or working with Ministry of Ag. So yeah, that's sort of all I have to add.
Okay. At this point, I'd like, I mean, if for instance, the plan that Sue is talking about comes to the board, and then the board needs us to have give them some feedback related to agriculture, and then we have to have a meeting as a result, which could trigger this kind of meeting. Then, but in the meantime, I think what we need to do is just leave this in on LAF's list, and if we could check in with Sarah as she makes the transition, and then Sarah can give Will's contact information and to the new ED, and then maybe work together to host this meeting.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I don't know if I was clear in what I was saying there, but I do think it's a good fit for laughs, and I do think it's something we can absolutely facilitate. I think that's the right connection. So yeah, I can get started on what that would look like and maybe when we would host it, just to have a rough outline.
Okay, that sounds good. And I can let me know, and in my volunteer capacity, I can let you know how these things have worked in the past. I've also been involved in ones in the Caribou quite a bit. So just let me know, because I can help with organizing. Vivian, did you have your hand up?
I did briefly, just to say, I think this is a perfect fit for laughs. And so as long as Sarah can pick it up in the transition, that would be great. And I think there would be quite a bit of local interest in this topic. So thank you.
Thanks, Vivian. I completely agree. I think that we need to, to have a discussion about this for sure. Okay, anybody else have any questions, comments regarding this action? Great, we'll leave it as is and then check in next meeting. Okay, so the next action obviously is for us to start reviewing the zoning bylaw. So I'll just skip over that one and we'll get to that. The other is, the next action is staff to explore addressing the ALR mapping errors do you have an update, Claire, or is this just, I think this was on our list of actions from top priority on the tracking list, I believe.
Yes, yeah, and we talked about it last meeting, just in relation to some of the zoning conversations as well. I don't have an update on this item. It's something we'll still be working to address and kind of get to the bottom of what why the mapping errors exist, and whether I'm not sure it's going to be a priority for the ALC to address their mapping. So it might just be something that we have to consider through our zoning as we are doing. So, but in terms of the bigger picture, we can try and advocate. It might not be seen as a big priority.
Okay, that sounds good. We'll carry forward. And does anyone else have any questions or comments regarding this particular action item? All right, and then the next two action items are complete. Claire to send the draft resolutions back to the AAC for review in advance of the next meeting, and then send the doodle poll out. So I think we are complete on that. And we can move on to our, the next item on our agenda. Okay, so this is where I just wanted to get people's input about what they wanted to look at while we were doing this. So basically, Claire has us starting back at item 2.4, but when you looked at the incomplete agenda that there's a new version of each of these bylaw sections that also contain more information than what we were looking at last time. So starting on page 5, I have it, and you can see that we've completed that one. It's regarding agri-zoning. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different cells, and each of them have the issue, the current bylaw, the regulatory framework, our recommendation, which will either be populated because we've completed it, or blank because we need to. And then there's also the staff recommendation. And then there's also underneath rationale that has some information. So this is the one that we were doing before, and the other version. So does anyone have any preference? Sorry, go ahead, Alex. I see you.
Thanks, Jackie. I just wanted to clarify. So it's not anything new. It was in the previous agenda package. At least, yeah. So it's a staff report that was meant to kind of provide more detailed background information.
Okay.
But the PowerPoint was meant to be what we're kind of guiding the discussion, but the hope was that everyone has had a look through this report, and this provides more detail about things like Ministry of Ag recommendations as well. Just for everyone's knowledge. So this was included before. Nothing has changed since the previous meeting.
Okay, thank you. That's just my bad. I definitely was a little out of it last time, that's for sure. Okay, well, I think that if there's no big objections, let's just go back to this simplistic view. I do like the background information that's provided, and thank you, staff, for doing that. It's like really, really informative, and it's laid out nicely, but it is quite busy.
And
I'm
I
just
will
gonna leave that for a
offer,
second.
if we need to refer to that, I can switch over, like I can switch between the two, so we can use the PowerPoint to guide our discussion. If we want to reference some of that more detailed information, I can shift the screen to that information if that's helpful.
That sounds good. All righty. Any other comments or questions on that from the committee members? Okay, let's get started. We're already a little bit behind, but I just want to acknowledge that we will probably not get through it all today, but we'll do our best to get it through as much as possible. All right, so issue 2.4, farm status for a resident, secondary farm resident. The recommendation is to require farm status. This is where we left off last, and I know Sue had some comments and concerns regarding the farm status for the secondary. And did you want to capture those again, Sue? Or yeah.
Yes, I think I would. So here's my case in point proven for us. So my assessment went up 64%, and farm status is tied to the value of your land once you're past a certain size. No way in heck can farmers take jumps like that in a single year and try and expect to meet the revenue demands and everything else. So tying to farm status doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, if it's ALR land, it should be part of the decision-making process for agriculture. Farm status is irrelevant. It just speaks about current land use. It doesn't talk about future and potential land use. And yeah, that's my argument against it.
Can I hear from other committee members on this? Go ahead, Vivian.
Just based on that one example from Sue is all I need to hear. This should not be tied to farm status.
Okay, I'm not hearing anything else. So it sounds like the motion going forward is to not require farm status for secondary farm residences. So would this, that's our recommendation, and that would be the motion put forward to add this to our recommendation. Go ahead, Will.
Just curious if there's no requirement to have farm tax status, what's your requirement then to classify it as a farm? Like it's going down as a secondary farm residence, but if they don't have farm tax status, I'm just.
I have Stefan and then Sue.
Sorry, just processing that last comment from Will there. I'll get back to you.
Okay, go ahead, Sue.
It's already ALR land. So farm status is, it's already classed as agricultural land. So it should be treated as such, right? It has the potential to be a farm, whether you have status or not. I don't have farm status. Am I a farm? Absolutely. I have livestock, I have chickens, I sell, I report my income. I just don't have farm status because I haven't done the paperwork. So, you know, it's it's a voluntary farm status is a voluntary process. So why would we require it in the regulation of what happens on this land?
That's a good point. And also to all the regulations that go along with being an ALR. So I just wanted to check back in with Stefan, and then I've got Will and Rolf.
Yeah, just to go along with Sue's points there. I mean, if it is tied to, and I'm just trying to find exactly the thresholds again, but I mean, if farm status is tied to receipts that are a percentage of your assessed value of your property, and there's a year-on-year jump like that, that seems to defy any kind of logic, then yeah, definitely could be behind supporting not requiring farm status for that purpose.
Okay, thanks, Stefan. Will?
I guess just to sum up, play devil's advocate to Sue's point. So I'm not questioning that you're functioning as a farm right now. So if there's no requirement for farm status, you build a secondary farm residence and then decide you don't want to farm anymore. Does that mean now you're no longer functioning as a farm? You have to get rid of that residence? Or is it just a caveat of a way to get a secondary residence on a parcel?
Okay, I'm gonna go to Sue. Do you want to respond to that? And then I'll head over to Rolf.
Thanks, Jackie. Again, I think it should be tied to it being ALR land, not to farm status. So the rules are what the rules are for the ALR land. And if you're on ALR land and you meet the criteria for getting a secondary residence, then carry on. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons to have a secondary residence beyond simple farm status. I mean, in terms of having the ability to have your kids come home, have farm help, take care of an elder parent, whatever. There's lots of reasons why a person living on ALR land could need a second residence. And none of them have anything to do with farm status in my view.
Okay, thanks, Sue. Go ahead, Rolf.
Yeah, I think the and it ties in what Sue just said. I mean, it's called a farm residence, it's not called a secondary residence. And I think the ALR has spoken about these secondary residences in the context of it being required to house farm workers. And in that regard, I think, you know, having ALR is not sufficient to indicate the need for such a secondary residence. And if the secondary residence is there just to house non-essential other residents that are not tied to the farm, then we're wasting valuable farmland for residential development. And I would be opposed to that. And I think there needs to be a demonstrated need for the residents because of the activities on the farm. And whether not it's proven through farm status or some other means, but I think the secondary residence is there solely to support the farming activities.
Thanks, Rolf. Sue?
And I think that's really discriminatory against families and their needs. I don't think it's realistic to punish a family who needs more space. So if I'm the farmer and I have to take care of my elder parent and I can't build a facility to do that on my farm, you're telling me I have to leave my farm? That doesn't make any kind of sense at all. And I don't think it's the ALR's job to decide what's appropriate in terms of those uses. And secondary residence, and I can't remember how this ties in or doesn't tie into things like the tourism stuff, agritourism and everything else. But anyway, I think that's really discriminatory and could badly impact talented farmers who need better accommodation for their families in order to stay on the farm and keep it farming.
Okay, Rolf, do you want to respond?
Yeah, it is for the same reason why the ALR has restricted floor size on primary residences. They have restricted it to 5,000 square feet. And you can say that it is discriminatory because it doesn't allow you to have all your family members in that primary residence. And so it is the same rationale that drives that gross floor area for the primary residence goes for the secondary residence. It is there only to house essential staff for the farm. And so if you say, well, the secondary residence, I feel that it's discriminatory, then we're going to have to get rid of the 5,000 square feet because it's discriminatory as well.
All right. At this point, we have two pretty polarized opinions about this. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Ralph. You've got another thing.
Sorry, I didn't lower my hand.
Okay, all right, sorry. All right. Staff, is there any other information that you would like to bring forward that could help us make come to consensus? And Sue, I've got you as well.
I'll let Alex speak to this because she's spent a lot more time working on this bylaw update project. I did just want to highlight, I did put in the minutes this farm status, the requirements that we had discussed last time, just if that's of interest for people to refer to, but I'll let Alex speak to the zoning aspects.
Okay, thank you. So through the chair, I think to Rolf's point, what he was saying, there isn't really another mechanism in place for us on the SLRD side to determine whether or not a parcel is being farmed and would kind of meet that need requirement to allow for the secondary residence. I will say it's meant to be a little bit more permissive than being strictly for farm staff or farm workers. It's meant to allow potentially for rental or family accommodation or that type of thing. But it is, as he stated, meant to be kind of supporting a farm operation. It's not meant to just be allowing for lots of residential use on parcels in the ALR that aren't being actively farmed. So if we don't go with farm status, there isn't another way for us to make that determination. There's no way to check if the parcel is being actively farmed. So you could look at it from the other perspective, which is that although there is some paperwork involved, it is kind of a way to, what's the word that I'm looking for, but basically legitimize your application for a secondary farm residence. So I'll just leave it at that. And if Claire has anything to add. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Go ahead, Will, and then I have Sarah.
So I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. If they were to not require farm tax status, the application still has to go to the ALC for approval, does it not?
You can go ahead. You can respond, staff.
Okay, I'll just respond to that. No, it doesn't any longer because under the changes in regulations, it's allowed under the ALR use regulation, this secondary residence. So basically it's the zoning now that we're working on. And so long as it was in the zoning, it already automatically meets that provincial level regulation.
So I have Sarah and then I have Vivian.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think for the farm status, like you said, it's a bunch of paperwork, but to me, most of them look like a fairly low bar in terms of paperwork. Aside from the only thing I see that is maybe problematic in there is that if that 5% is actual value of the land, that really changes the whole discussion. Yeah, I don't have a solution.
Do we know if that, yeah, go ahead, staff. Yep, Alex, go ahead.
Sorry, I can't find my raise hand button. I will say that I have seen cases in other electoral areas recently where people have been appealing the assessment. So that's another option. Like if the assessment is really out of whack with what you think the value of your property is, you can appeal to BC assessment and potentially get that number reduced to a more manageable amount.
Yeah, that's a good point. Ours also
I
increased.
would just
Vivian, go
like to
ahead.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to respond to that in that I think that assessments across the province it's unattainable for farmers. Like that's not a fair metric for farmers. And we need people to be farming. And land prices are not allowing for that. And adding other things that calculate on land prices is insane. That doesn't work for farmers in growing food.
Good point. Vivian?
To strongly reiterate just what Sarah said from Laughs, thank you, that if we're going to be tying this to property values, the way the property values are going here and more paperwork for the farmers, I don't think that's really going to encourage farming. I'm only thinking about Area B here. But this was a provincial lobby by farmers to be allowed a secondary residence on their agricultural land for the purposes of agritourism, family, farm help, other things. And I think the ALC is allowing it after really careful consideration. And I'm not sure that we want to make more rules beyond what the ALC has already provided. Thanks.
Thanks, Vivian. Alex, did you have a response to something before I go on to the other?
Yes, thanks. It was just a really quick statement that cases that we've seen where there's a really high valuation on the property, often what's being done is, even though the ag zoning may apply to the whole parcel, BC assessment will sometimes look at if a portion of your parcel is not in the ALR, sometimes that will be assessed differently. And that's a specific case where you might be able to request a reassessment. And then just to what Vivian was just, Director Birch Jones was just saying, I'm losing my my line of thinking here. But basically it's the regulations are coming from the ministry, right? They're coming from the provincial level, and the ALC is kind of an interpretive body that works underneath them. But when the ALC planning staff gave their presentation to our staff around this specific thing requiring farm status, it's certainly something that they are looking at recommending. Again, because there is no other mechanism in place to determine that secondary residence is associated with a kind of a bona fide farm operation. I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. I've got Sue, Stefan, Will, and Sarah. So Sue?
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. I just want to say thank you, Sarah, for saying it so plainly, and Vivian for the support in it. Tying it to the value of the land is the issue. It's not about the farm status per se, it's the requirement to do that. And land prices are only going to go up. Asking for a reassessment is wrong-headed too. Why would I want to devalue the value of my property? That doesn't make any sense as a farmer either, just to try and get farm status. So it's just a problematic term, and create another solution. Have them provide farm receipts, do something else if you're really worried about it. But otherwise, adding more restrictions just seems really counterintuitive to getting more people to farm.
Okay, thanks, Sue. I have Stefan next.
Hey, sorry about that, just a little slow. I'm just looking at gov.bc.ca, Monday, July 12th, 2021, increasing housing flexibility in the ALR. And so options for additional small secondary home have been added to the regulations, allowing farmers and ALR landowners to have both a principal residence and a small secondary residence on their property with a streamlined approval process. The additional residence can be used for housing extended family, agritourism accommodation, housing for farm labor, or rental property for supplemental income. There is no longer a requirement that additional residences must be used by the landowner or immediate family members, which I think just goes to sort of underline the point that I believe Vivian was making, is that it's not necessarily tied to that farming activity, and has been stated as such by the provincial government.
Thanks, Stefan. Go ahead, Will.
Just to kind of add, I think one of the issues, so if you tie it to having farm tax status, what happens in the following year when they don't apply and they don't get it? Like, would you then need to have the requirement to maintain it, or it's just at that current year? It's something that producers can apply and get and then not reapply and not get the following year. So it may not be the most efficient way of determining that the parcel's functioning as a farm.
Okay, good point. Sarah, you did have your hand up. Are you still wanting to make another comment, or?
No, I think I need to, have another look at that B there with the 5% and think about that before I think there is a way to kind of make that work potentially, and make it be something that's achievable for farmers if the land value isn't in there, but I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, just how that would work based on the other calculations.
Okay, Rolf, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there's anyone on this committee that supports the way that farm status is established. And because I hear a lot of objections, right? I mean, and I understand those objections. And I guess I'm just curious if there's anyone in favor of how farm status is determined. Okay, so that means basically this committee, the full committee feels that the way that farm status is determined is inaccurate or incorrect. And if that's the case, then I think, and what I've also heard is that, having farming activities or being able to prove that you have farming activities in itself is not bad, but farm status is not the way. So having heard that, I would like to perhaps suggest the following motion is that the AAC recommends that secondary residences will not require farm status in light of the fact that it is not the most effective way to prove farming activities.
I'd second the motion.
Is there any more discussion on that? Because I think it's accurate. That's what I've been hearing. And does anyone have any more comments on that one?
And just to add, I think from my perspective is that it puts pressure on the regulator, or it gives at least a notice to the regulator that there are indeed some structural issues with farm status and the devaluation of farmlands that result in people not seeking farm status because of that. So it pushed pressure on policymakers to do something with that farm status thing.
Yep, good point, Ralph. Are we ready to basically, are we ready to make a decision on this? Because I'd like to go forward to see if there was anybody in objection to that motion. Oh. Okay, hearing none. Motion has passed. And there may be some follow-up regarding this. Did anyone, or sorry, staff, do you have any? No, I think we're just gonna move on. You guys there may be a red flag for you if there is a need to create some clarification about in that process about in the bylaw to do with proving farm activities. But at this point, we have made our decision on this particular one, and I think it's best to move on.
I'll just note in the minutes, please feel free to tweak the language that I have jotted down for the motion to make sure I've accurately captured, but we can look at that when we're reviewing the minutes after the meeting. Thank you.
That sounds very good. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Rolf, for that. That's good. I'd like to move on to the next topic or issue. Oops. Okay, 2.5, secondary farm residence minimum parcel size. And so the regulatory framework does not set a minimum parcel size for this use, ALR use regulation. And the recommendation is to regulate it in a local context. And the staff is recommending that secondary farm residences be permitted on parcels 2 hectares or greater. So basically it's the limit is nothing below 2 hectares can have a secondary. Go ahead, Alex.
Just to say, I think we may have spoken about this at the previous meeting, but that I think it was meant to be 4 hectares. There's a typo in this and it's different in the report. So just to flag that 4 hectares is what we're recommending that threshold be.
Okay. And the 4 hectares is.
Oh, that's correct. Just to chime in really quickly, we talked about shifting that threshold from 2 hectares to 4 hectares. That was where the AAC was at last discussion.
Okay, so basically we were leaning towards the 4 hectares. And tell me again, that's a 10 acre, how many? Yep, 4 is 10, okay. All right, any discussion on this? We in agreement that 4 seems a reasonable threshold for a secondary residence, or is 5, I guess 2 is 5 acres. All right, I'm here. Oh, Stefan, go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, and just to further inform the discussion, according to the ALUI, that's 1% of the agricultural land base and 22% of the parcels in Area B.
Are 2 hectares or 4?
4.
Okay, is there any objections to going to the minimum of a 4? Okay, so let's put forward a motion that our recommendation is that it would be the 4. So secondary farm residence to be permitted on parcels 4 hectares or greater. Okay. Is your hand still up, Stefan?
Oh, sorry, no. Although I guess, I mean, I think what I was trying to illustrate there is that, while that is quite a considerable number of parcels, it's also quite a small proportion of our agricultural land reserve area in Area B. So that's just something I wanted to get out there.
In other words, that if we could lower it to 2 and that wouldn't be, okay. I'm not hearing from any other committee members as this being a showstopper. So I think that the 4 sounds like it could be moved. Does anyone, could someone make that motion?
This is Rolf. I'll make the motion that secondary farm residences are to be permitted on parcels of 4 hectares or greater.
Thank you. Can we have a seconder?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Any objections? Okay, let's move forward. Okay, secondary farm residents. And we have several. So the first is secondary farm residents on parcels under 40 hectares have a maximum size of 90 square meters. That's the ALR. And we just say only on parcels over 4 hectares. All right, how many is it just the 2 here, or is there something below there? Do we have more on that particular? No, okay, it's just the 2. Okay. And then the secondary residents on parcels of over 40, then the permitted footprint would be 186 square meters. This seems reasonable to me. Stefan, do you still have your hand up? Oh, sorry, Alex, go ahead with a comment, and then, okay, there we go.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. Yeah, so as you said, we just covered the 4 hectares piece, but basically just to provide clarity if needed, the staff recommendation is to align with the ALR use regulations. So there's the option if the AAC wanted to consider it to regulate, kind of to lower those GFA limits, but staff is recommending that we stick with the 90 and stick with the 186 that are allowed under the provincial regulations, both of which have a fairly small footprint on the land. Thank you.
Go ahead, Rolf. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that the AAC recommends to follow the ALR use regulations for the secondary farm residence gross footprint area as described in issue 2.6.
Thank you, Rolf. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, Stefan, thank you, Sue, for the seconder. Before we go ahead with the vote, Stefan, do you have a comment?
It seems that contradicts our previous motion, because if we're going with the ALR recommendation, then we are not imposing any kind of a GFA limit on any parcel size. So I just want to be clear on if we say we're going with the ALR recommendation, then we're saying that we're not regulating anything, which contradicts the previous motion.
All right, can somebody help me out here? Because this one's, I hear what you're saying, Stefan, I just need a little bit more clarification. Ralph, is your hand? I know, Alex, you could speak to this. Let's go Alex first and then Ralph.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. So just to clarify, under the provincial regulations, under the ALR use regulation, for any parcel of 40 hectares or smaller, you're allowed a secondary residence of up to 90 square meters. So what staff are recommending is that, in keeping with the motion that was just made on the previous agenda item, any parcel from 4 hectares up to 40, 90 square meters will be allowed. And then under those provincial regulations, on parcels that are over 40 hectares, you're allowed up to 186 square meters. So that's the limit that would be placed on it. You can't exceed that because that's a provincial threshold. You could only decide to regulate further than that. Does that clarify? Right. Okay.
That helps me out anyways. I've got okay. Ralph. Actually, Ralph took his hand down, I'm guessing, I think. But I do have Sue next.
So can we just amend that to say, because we do have that 4 hectare lower limit, isn't that the difference? Yeah, so we just have to, it's not quite the recommendations because we've got the lower limit in. So I don't know how to phrase it, but can we amend it to include that 4 hectares or to have that lower limit?
Go ahead, Ralph.
So I'll amend the motion. The AAC recommends that secondary farm residences are permitted on parcels over 4 hectares and under 40 hectares with maximum floor size of 90 square meters. And secondary farm residences are permitted on parcels over 40 hectares with a floor size of gross floor area of 186 square meters.
Okay, thanks, Rolf. Before we have a seconder, I have Will's hand up.
Just looking, and there's nothing included in here on the floor size of the primary residence, where it looks, from what I'm reading, if for parcels 40 hectares or smaller, the primary residence has to be under 500 square meters to have a secondary residence. So does that need to be included in there? If it's over 500 square meters, they'd have to apply to the ALC.
Go ahead, Alex, you can respond to that. Yep.
So we hadn't included that on this slide, but you're absolutely right. So if there's an existing residence over 500 square meters on the parcel, then this is not something that you automatically get. You would have to go through that non-adhering residential use application process. So it was staff's intention, because that's baked into the provincial regulations. There's no wiggle room there for changing that. That was just going to be in the zoning bylaw when we get to that stage. But I think that really is good background knowledge for everyone on the AAC. So that 500 existing principal residence on a parcel of any size over 500 square meters, that triggers a non-adhering residential use application if you want your secondary farm residence. So thanks, Will.
Right, I do remember reading. Yeah, thank you. I do remember reading that. Okay, so we have a motion that's been put on the table. Do we have a seconder? Maybe before
I'll
we go
second
to
it.
the second. Oh, thanks, Stefan. All right, any objections to that?
Sorry, just to clarify, that wasn't me. I don't know who that was.
Oh, sorry, who was that?
That was me, sorry. Will.
Okay, Will, okay, so just to clarify, can Will second motions on our committee?
I don't believe so, no.
I'll second that.
My apologies.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, though. I appreciate it. Sue, thank you for that seconder. Any objections to these, to this motion, to both motions? Okay, great. Alex, go ahead. Did you, or you still get, you don't have your hand up. Okay. You guys, it's 11 o'clock. And I do need like a minute bio break before we get on to the next topic. So if we could do that for 2 minutes and then come back, that would be really great. And you're shaking. So that I'm gonna, unless you want, I can pass the torch and you guys can carry on. No, we're good. Okay, let's have a quick bio break and then we'll come back. Okay, thanks. Hi, I'm back. Thanks you guys for your patience on that. I am here. Okay. Alrighty, is everyone else back? You can just have a quick thumbs up on your profile there. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Sue. Hi, Ralph.
Hello.
Hi, Will. Great. Looks like we've got everybody. Hi, Alex. Great. Okay. And do we have Stefan too?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right, housing form. So regulatory framework says it does not provide any provisions for the form. ASC recommendation is regulate for local context, and the staff recommendation is allow a range of residential options to ensure maximum flexibility for farmers, manufactured homes, above farm building, and carriage house. This looks good to me. The flexibility is what we need. Any comments or from the committee?
Just that if
Go ahead, Ralph.
Yeah,
And then
if
Stefan.
we're going to allow for a range of flexibility, then why do we need to include anything into the zoning bylaw? Is a question I would have for Stefan.
Okay, I'll let Alex respond and then we'll go to Stefan.
Thanks, Jackie. So I think this is just in there for discussion. It's really to say that we won't write the bylaw in such a way that it would prohibit any of these types of housing. But it doesn't need to be written into the bylaw. It's just to say, yeah, what would be written is something that would prohibit, for example, like a manufactured home or a carriage house, but that's not the way we're intending to write the bylaw. We're intending to write it in a way that allows for this flexibility, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. Basically, we're recommending that it sounds like that we wouldn't want any restrictions, basically. Stefan, did you have something to add to that?
No, that was my question as well. And if it sounds like the bylaw will be written in such a way as to expressly prohibit certain types of forms rather than providing a list of the forms that would be permitted, then that's fine by me.
Okay, that's great. What it sounds like then is that we would like to specifically say in our motion that we agree with the staff recommendation to allow a range of residential options to ensure maximum flexibility for farmers, and that we would like no restrictions specifically to be written into the bylaw. Does that capture it? Do I have a seconder?
I'll second. This is Rolf.
And from Ralph?
Yes.
Are there any objections? Okay, we can move on. All right, so gross floor, I always get this mixed up, but temporary farm worker housing. And we're looking at tell me gross floor area, right? Okay.
Yes.
So in this particular one, the recommendation is the ALC prefers workers housed in existing structures where possible, or temporary structures. Applicants must demonstrate the need maximum of 35 square meters per worker. And then the staff is recommending that we set gross floor area as per temporary farm worker 15 square meters to a maximum of 270 square meters. I'm opening it up. Oh, and Alex, go ahead. Oh, you're still on mute.
Okay.
First one of the meeting.
Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, had to be someone. Okay. So just a little bit more information here. That 35 square meters per worker that's set or recommended by the ALC is the total residential footprint. That would include any kind of landscaped areas or parking around the structure. The 15 square meters, that's coming from the Ministry of Agriculture recommendation. And that's 15 square meters for the floor area itself. So 15 square meters within the structure per worker is what we're recommending. And that's in line with, again, the provincial recommendations. And it says it here, but just to reiterate, the temporary farm worker housing can no longer be approved except by way of an application to the Agricultural Land Commission. So you'd have to apply under that non-adhering residential use stream. And they will specifically, they'll be looking for, you need to meet that need requirement. So there's pretty stringent requirements on the ALC side to get permission to do the temporary farm worker housing.
Okay, and just to clarify, you also have a maximum, and that is capping the amount of temporary farm workers and for that as 18, correct? Because if you divide 15 into 270, you're saying you just get 18.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, Ralph, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious what the 18 is based on.
Yes, I think this is one of those cases where it is recommended that there is a limit on that. And this is something that has been done in other areas. So maybe we might want to talk about whether that's appropriate in area B or not, if it's the AAC feels that there's a need to accommodate more temporary farm workers. And again, it will also be evaluated by the ALC. So they're not, if you only need 18 people, they're not going to allow you to build a much larger structure. It's going to be limited in that way as well.
Ralph, did you have another comment on that? Yeah, the 18 seems sort of weird, interesting.
Yeah, so just I guess for further discussion, and temporary for workers are used quite often in vineyards and other high added value products like blueberries or pot farms or otherwise. And with the larger parcel size in our area, where we have farms 300 acres or 1,000 acres, the number of 18 timber uniform workers is going to be restrictive in terms of the number of timber uniform workers you can have effectively at your farm, and wouldn't serve the number that you would need. We're looking at, for vineyards, at 1 timber uniform worker for every 10 acres of vineyard. So if you have a 300 acre parcel, you got 30 timber uniform workers. The additional consideration here is that if you want to restrict the temporary informal worker housing and move it to a more residential area, you get a lot of travel, right? And particularly in some of the farms that are out on Highway 12 or Texas Creek, having to drive staff back and forth every day from town to these farms is costly, time consuming, and unnecessary. So from that perspective, I wouldn't necessarily be in favor of putting a number out there of 18. So that's with regard to the number of 18. Now, I guess a clarifying question is that it is my understanding that temporary and foreign worker housing is typically done in I don't know what the name of it is called, but like an ATCO trailer, a temporary structure that can be removed at any point, and that no permanent structures are built on ALR to house temporary and foreign workers. And particularly when you're talking about 18 people, you can't put them in a residence of 180 square meters because it would just wouldn't fit. So typically you see in the Okanagan and in Abbotsford and that sort of stuff, these temporary structures that are done. Now, am I understanding that there is now an approval process required for these temporary housing units, or is it just for permanent housing units that you need approval? I'm just curious.
Go ahead, Alex. I remember we discussed a little bit of this already, but yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So yes, it no longer, I think in past, it might have been an application through the SLRD, but now all of those applications for temporary farm worker housing have to go through the Agricultural Land Commission. So you need to apply for non-adhering residential use. and you need to prove out your need for those farm workers. And then in general, what the ALC is looking for ideally is a temporary structure. That's what they want to see. That's the preferred housing form. So if you don't have, maybe if you only have 3 or 4, then you could potentially house them in your secondary farm residence, if that's permitted. But if you have larger numbers of workers, ideally they want to see a temporary structure or some other, so that would be an existing structure, with a farm residence, a secondary farm residence, or a temporary structure. And just a little bit to your point of not capping it at 18, I think that absolutely does make sense. I think that you probably do want to have some sort of maximum limit per farm worker, because the ALC will also be kind of looking back at the zoning bylaw and what's allowed there as these decisions are being made. So that you don't end up with a really large structure. It's a good idea to have some sort of limit in there, but it doesn't need to be a limit that caps the number of workers. Thanks.
Okay, the only thing with that is if we're setting a limit per farm worker and then we set a cap, it's going to be a cap. We're going to be capping the amount of farm workers that are, permitted. So, yeah, maximum 35 square meters per worker. Okay, so go ahead, Alex. Do you want, or Ralph, do you still have your hand up? Did you want to make another comment after Alex's, or?
Yep. Just, I guess, to provide some perspective, is that these ATCO trailers have a very large footprint because you can't stack them. And so they, we've looked at these structures and that sort of stuff, and they're not very efficient housing units. So that just as a sort of a background thing, I would much rather see, something where we can actually stack these things so that you can get more people on a lower home plate or whatever it's called. But anyway, but that's just my opinion. But having heard staff and whatnot, then I think I would be supportive of putting a maximum gross floor area per temporary floor worker of 15 square meters, and leave it at that. And so the motion would be that the AAC recommends to set a maximum gross floor area per temporary and floor worker housing unit of 15 square meters per temporary and floor worker.
Yeah. Okay, and just not putting the cap on is what you're saying.
Correct.
Alex, no, you don't have something to add. I do have Vivian Birch-Jones's hand up.
Thank you, Jackie. And just a question for Alex. When we're talking about temporary housing, and I'm seeing those ATCO trailers that Ralph's referring to, but do they not all need to be hooked up to electricity and water and septic? And we still are calling them temporary. Am I getting that?
I might let Claire chime in here as well. It's a little bit more of a building department piece. I would think that they would need to be hooked up to septic, but there might be a different way to service them with a field. But temporary basically is like not on a permanent foundation, and can easily be, so it's not impacting the soil underneath. So it kind of maintains that agricultural potential for future use. I think that's really what they're getting at with the temporary structures, is it's not having any sort of negative impact on the land base itself. It's sitting on a temporary type of foundation that has a very minimal footprint and impact, and then can be taken off when it's no longer needed, which is something that the ALC does require. So usually it would be covenanted and that type of thing to make sure that it is taken off if that need is no longer being met.
And some of these units also they're all self-contained and pumped out. They're not necessarily on septic or anything. It's like a fire camp. So I see your hand up.
Just a question. For the programs that bring in the temporary farm workers, do they have specifications on the maximum that you can put into one set structure. I'm just wondering if that would put it like where they have a minimum that each worker has to be allowed so many square meters. Is there a maximum that you can only put 20 workers into one shared space or something to that effect? I've been trying to find it, but I can't find anything on it. So it may not exist, but just a question if that was where a cap was coming from.
I'm seeing Claire shake her head. Doesn't
I
sound like there
haven't
is. Go ahead, Claire.
seen, yeah, I haven't seen anything. We also haven't had many examples in the SLRD of large scale temporary farm worker housing. I can't think of any that's been, you know, over 10 workers. That said, there could be, to Ralph's point, you know, as we see some of our agriculture sectors growing, an increase in need, and certainly we have large spaces of land available. But I don't think we have much to look to in terms of a local context at present. And as Alex mentioned, the temporary piece from the ALC perspective is really just to do with the foundation. The structures can look different, and the servicing arrangements, those are all kind of, you know, addressed at the building permit stage. So we don't need to get into that from a zoning perspective because there's so many nuances depending on what type of temporary structure is being used.
Alex, did you have something to add before I move on to Ralph?
Just really quickly to say that I think that's a good point that I believe it was Will made. So that's something we can double check with our building department on, and that's something that we can kind of bring back to the next meeting as well, if there is any sort of occupancy limit or something like that that was initially driving that 270 square meter limit. So we'll bring that back if there's any further information around that piece.
Okay, all right. I think we're getting close here. Ralph?
Yeah, there's a very detailed list of requirements that that Wally sets for temporary and foreign workers. I can share that with you. There are also minimum floor space requirements that are set. They are below 15 square meters, so the 15 square meters creates a little bit more living space for the temporary and foreign workers than the minimum requirement. And for as far as I know, there's no limitations to the size, the maximum size of the building, but there are limitations to the minimum size of the building.
Okay, that makes sense. At this point, though, can we move forward with a recommendation to set the maximum GFA per temporary foreign worker to 15 square meters, period? Can we put that forward as a motion unless something changes with new information about this cap?
I believe that was a motion I put forward earlier.
You already, you did. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Ralph. We have a seconder on that one. Did we have Sue?
Yeah.
We have a seconder. Did we pass this already? I just want to make sure we finish that one. Can I have so are we all in agreement? And did I get a seconder on this? Not quite. I just need a seconder and any nays on this.
I seconded it. It's Sue.
You did. Okay. All right. All right. Thank you. Carry on. Somebody just needs to remind me. All right. Next topic. All right. Farm residential footprint. We are looking at the regulatory framework does not include provisions for this maximum soil fill without application or NOI is 1,000 square meters. ALC is recommending regulating at a local context, and the staff is recommending to introduce farm residential footprint to preserve agricultural capability of land could apply only to parcels under 8 hectares, as these are smaller parcels most impacted by non-farm uses. 8 hectares is still 20 acres. That's still quite large. Do we have some Sue Singer? and then Stefan.
Thanks, Jackie. I would like to, if we can, to discuss what that farm footprint means. So when I scroll down to the next page and I'm looking at the description and it says one boundary of the farm residential footprint must be located at a property line. We're not on a floodplain here. Like if you look at some of our properties, it would be very detrimental. Some of these descriptions, I would rather see, if we're going to talk about how you decide where the footprint, the residential footprint is, it should be based on the quality of the farmland, not some arbitrary property boundary. So that's my concern with this language. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Good point, Sue. Stefan?
Yeah, same as Sue there, just a little curious to find out what sorts of things might fit into a residential footprint. And also, yeah, sharing the same concerns about the sample provision drawn from the Area D bylaw there. So.
Okay, go ahead, Alex.
Thanks. Claire, would you be able to pull up, so on the slide deck or the PowerPoint presentation, the next slide has, there we go, the sample provisions, which as Stefan said are from Area D. So I think the reason we have the staff recommendation in here is because on those parcels that are over, now that has been decided, over 4 hectares and under 8 hectares, there's potential for additional residential uses. We wanted to introduce this discussion about residential footprint, which this is something that's being used in other agricultural areas in the SLRD. These are example provisions for what would typically be included in a residential footprint portion of a bylaw, but obviously this is completely up for discussion and could be reshaped to fit the Area B context. As Sue was giving the example of maybe potentially the agricultural potential of the soils or something like that. But the intention of these provisions is to minimize the impact to the ag land and to preserve as much of the land base for farming as possible. So for example, the reason the footprint is typically close to the main road access is to minimize the driveway length. So you don't have a big, long, winding driveway going through the middle of the best agricultural land on the property. So there's typically a depth from that main access where the footprint would be located. There's typically a cap on the size of that footprint. And that would be all the residential uses would need to be clustered within that area. So if it's 2,000 square meters, you have to have your principal farm residence, your secondary farm residence, and any other residential things like a swimming pool or that type of thing would all need to be located within that footprint area. And as I said, typically one of the boundaries is kind of up against a property line or close to that main access point. And then it says here, the last bullet point talks about farm employee residence. So that's no longer under consideration. It would be the farm residence, the secondary farm residence. And then temporary farm worker housing is kind of a separate consideration. In other areas, if the footprint is 2,000 square meters without the temporary farm worker housing, there's the provision for adding an additional 500 square meters to that footprint area to accommodate the farm worker housing. But basically the idea is just to cluster all of these residential uses and minimize any negative impacts or potential negative impacts to the agricultural land and preserve it for food production.
Okay, thanks, Alex. I understand what you're saying. And I just wanted to point out, which may be what Sue and Vivian, who I have next, will be pointing out, is that a lot of this is very applicable to things in the Lower Mainland where you have a flat, very uniformly square or rectangular type lot. And these are these gargantuan houses that they want to put on them. And in our area, and I'm curious about residential in Area D and how this works, but in our area, we have variable land, we have hills and mountains, and some of this may require us to put residents and different things in different areas, and clustering may not make sense because we have rock on one end and we have something on the other end that's going to be better for building potentially or not better for building. So I think that we need to consider something that's is more flexible. And so I'm going to hand it over to Sue that may just go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. Exactly what I'm thinking too. You know, there can be really strong reasons why you need a long driveway here in order to access various buildings and avoid the best part of your agricultural land if you're trying to, you know, move in and around things. So I agree. If we can come up with wording that's much more flexible, the principle of clustering buildings away from the best agricultural land is awesome and a high value, but becoming too prescriptive on our land base would be just a nightmare, I think, for people trying to move forward with this.
Yep. And Vivian, and thank you, Sue. Vivian?
Thank you. And these sort of regulations tying where buildings can be related to property lines. There's been some discussions in some of the other areas where that hasn't made any sense at all in terms of the farm function and the best view or avoiding other hazards like landfalls or rock falls, floods, and so on. And so I think allowing for more flexibility here is probably better on this landscape.
I agree. I wonder, and I'm just going to put this out there as an idea, but I mean, when you're getting a building permit anyways, if it has, maybe there's an extra step that just somebody needs to sign off on it, like a PAG or an agrologist that's saying, yeah, this makes sense for this particular property. Maybe it could be a technician. I don't want to get to, again, I don't want to have an extra layer of approval, but it seems like there's a little more flexibility to be able to say, like, you know, somebody that has experience looking at small farms and soil capability and the lay of this particular farming layout makes sense. And we agree with putting this particular secondary residence there. That's just one idea, but I think what we're saying is that this particular one is not a good fit. Does anybody have any other ideas? Can we go back? Thank you. I just needed to get back to which number we were on. 2.9. So it says, yeah. Yeah, introducing residential farm footprint doesn't make sense to me. Anybody? Oh, sorry, Sue, go ahead, and then Rolf.
Let Ralph go first because he hasn't talked on this yet.
Okay, go ahead, Rolf.
Well, I appreciate the considerations on this matter. I can't shake the idea that most farm footprints are already established, right? So that there's already a home, and so if you're putting an application in for temporary foreign worker, temporary housing or a secondary residence, then I just can't see that the SLRD would then say, well, you have to move your residential footprint to the property line, and where the original primary residence was built 100 years ago, on top of a hill or something. So I'm failing to sort of see the practical implications of this recommendation, unless it is indeed a virgin piece of land, where then I wouldn't have necessarily the issue to put the additional burden on to sort of determine where the residential footprint is most efficiently placed, preserving the farmland, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just trying to understand the practical implications of this. Maybe staff can speak to that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Rolf, definitely. Sue, did you want to speak, and then I'll let Alex?
Yeah, I was gonna propose that we do not introduce the farm residential footprint in this version of the zoning bylaw. I think Ralph is right. Most of the land here does already have existing structures. I mean, there's a lot. Yeah, unless we can come up with some language around preserving the quality of the farmland, but I think most farmers would do that anyway. Yeah, so I would suggest we do not introduce this here.
Okay, thanks, Sue. And Alex?
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. So just a couple of quick things. To Rolf's point, certainly if there's an existing residence, that's where we would look at having those clustered uses. Like it would be grandfathered. We wouldn't ever require that a residence be moved up to the parcel line in order to meet these new provisions. It is for new residential development. One thing that the AAC may want to consider is, so the secondary farm residence is a pretty small, like 90 square meter or 186 square meter residence that would be provided for. Whether you want to set some sort of maximum distance from the existing residence for that to be located so that you don't end up with, for example, a second really long driveway going from the existing principal residence to the secondary farm residence, like if it's way at the back of the parcel or something like that. You might want to try to find a way, or maybe we want to try to find a way to write the bylaw in such a way that those two residences are fairly close together on the parcel to minimize that impact, but with writing it in a way that there is this increased flexibility that it sounds like is needed in Area B with the rocky terrain and all of those challenges that exist. Thanks.
I'm gonna throw it out there. I don't think that we need to do that. I think that the farmer is gonna put it where it needs to go. And if there is, I'm just thinking about right now, for instance, a property below me where they have driveway, 3 different accesses and quite a lot of driveway. But it's necessary for their farm operations. It doesn't inhibit the growth and what they can produce. And a lot of our bench lands have these outside areas that you can drive a long way and you're not breaking up the contiguous land for it. Okay, Rolf, go ahead.
Yeah, just again, it's interesting to hear when we talk about driveways, and if you look at many of the farms, is that they have an extensive network of farm roads to access fields that if you put a house at the end, then becomes all of a sudden a driveway, while in fact it is a farm road that is used to access land. So I think, having a good understanding of how farms require a roadway or a system of roadways to access things, and placing houses in certain areas doesn't necessarily require additional driveways or others. So I'm all for creating that footprint, but I just see so many practical challenges of defining that in some sort of a language in the bylaw that I just don't see a good way forward on that.
No, I agree. And I think that at this point, unless it's, like you said, a completely new piece of land that's free of any sort of buildings at all, I still feel like unless you have just some other like agriculture professional that has to just say, yeah, the farmer makes sense. But other than that, I would like to propose that we do not introduce residential footprints. And can we make them, do we want to make any more motions? Because at this point, I think that we can just keep it simple and just say that we recommend no residential footprint based on what we know of Area B and what makes sense for us. Go ahead, Sue.
will the discussion be captured? Like, I just wonder in terms of what goes forward to the board, will they need more explanation for why we think that?
Staff usually helps them with what's, anything that's it may not necessarily be completely captured in the minutes, but if they need clarification, and Vivian's here too, we've got three people that can convey how the discussion went. That we're not trying to, because a lot of people, when they think agriculture, they drive through Abbotsford and they're seeing these gargantuan homes being put down and with like paved driveways. And here we just have, we have homes and then maybe the temporary, but then we've got the dirt road that could easily just like, once that temporary farm residents go, could be put right back into farming. So we just have something that's different here. And unless they're going to pave it over and start building these gargantuan houses, it's really not applicable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I support what you're saying, that we just, I don't quite know how to phrase the motion other than to say I make a motion to not introduce residential, farm residential footprints for Area B.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Do we need to tweak that? It sounds fine to me.
I can second that, Jackie. Thank you. It's Vivian.
Thanks, Vivian. Are there any objections to this? Perhaps in the recommendation, Claire, we could just put some clarifications about a couple of points why we made that recommendation. That would be great.
Will do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on. Thanks. All right, moving on. We're in blue. We're in the agritourism accommodation 3.1, just doing a time check. We have 20 minutes left, so hopefully we can get through a few of these. So regulatory include agritourism accommodation ? Agritourism is permitted farm use and must not be prohibited. That's in the regulatory framework. Agritourism accommodation may be prohibited if permitted, subject to certain provisions, ALR use regulation, and the ALC recommendation is to regulate for local context. And your staff recommendation is to allow agritourism to support economic needs of Area B, which I feel the sentiment is there. So here, what is agritourism accommodation? Up to 4 rooms and 8 guests, and a B&B is in the home. It's not a separate building, which I remember. Agritourism accommodation in relation to agritourism activity, corn maze, etc. Allow up to 10 units. If you have a B&B, this counts towards 10. So 10 units, meaning we could have like 10 little cabins or something. And then allows for different types of sleeping units, camping, yurts, probably seasonal short term. All right, Alex, you want to add to this and then?
Did it again. Okay, thanks, Jackie. I just wanted to say, so these provisions are coming from the ALR use regulation. So for agritourism accommodation, as it said on the previous slide, agritourism is a permitted farm use. We cannot regulate that. Agritourism accommodation, it's up to local government whether or not that is regulated or permitted. If it is permitted, it has to be in relation to an ongoing agritourism activity on the parcel. It's seasonal, farm status is required. So that's not, in this particular case, that's not something that can be changed. That's coming from the provincial regulations. 10 units total. So again, if you have a bed and breakfast and you've already got 8 guests staying in the bed and breakfast, those units count toward your cap of 10. I think that's all I wanted to add. It's just that these provisions are coming from the provincial regulations, not what staff is proposing.
Okay, and that includes that seasonal short term, hey? Yeah, that's too bad. It's really short-sighted as far as tourism and our rural communities and the need for tourism to be year-round. Yeah,
but
I know there's not much we can.
Yes.
Oh,
sorry. Just to add that the bed and breakfast, that of course is not seasonal or short. I mean, it is a short-term basis. So your cap of, I think, 28 days, but it can be operated year-round.
So for a B&B currently in the is that that's in the provincial or the SLRD bylaws that you can only have?
So it
28.
is, the 28 days, I believe, is in our bylaw. It does, the provincial regulations also cap, it needs to be a short-term basis. And this 4 rooms and 8 guests is directly in the ALR use regulation. So there's kind of 2 pieces going on here. There's tourist accommodation, which is already allowed in the zones that are going to be rezoned as agriculture in Area B, and that's going to be maintained as a permitted use. So the question before the AAC right now is whether or not agritourism accommodation, which is a bit more flexible and could add a few more potential units, or as you said, camping units, that type of thing, whether that's appropriate in Area B. And I think in previous discussions with this committee, there's been a lot of support for seeing that be a permitted use. So it's not allowed for, I think, either in areas C or D in our zoning bylaws, but I think recognizing kind of the economic need in Area B for this type of accommodation, we're looking at being more permissive in this case.
Okay, and just to go back though to what you're saying about a cap of 28 days, what does that pertain to? And then I've got Rolf.
So that's what we use to, thanks Jackie, to define the short-term basis. So basically a long-term rental would be anything over that, right? Because it's roughly a month.
Oh,
stay
I
of
see. So
1
you're
month.
sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, you're saying 1 person. Gotcha. Okay. I just was
Yes.
thinking number of, yeah. Okay. I got confused.
No,
All
it's
right,
not
Rolf?
like an annual cap, nothing like that.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Just a question for clarification. 10 units, is that can that be a yurt for 12 people each? So we have 120 people, or is 10 units 10 people?
Mm.
I don't have that written down in front of me, so I'm just going to pull up just give me a moment and I'll circle back. I'm going to check the use regulation and I can read that piece out in a moment here.
But just to clarify, we don't have any wiggle room there, but okay. Okay, so just looking at that, allow agritourism accommodation to support the economic needs of Area B, I feel that that staff recommendation and that sentiment could easily be supported by our AAC, and that we could put that motion forward. Rolf? You
Yeah,
second that, or?
I'll second the motion if you put it forward.
Yes, I do. Thank you. And Stefan, and then Alex.
Sorry. So this is just one instance where there's just a bit of a departure between the slides and what's present in the information report. And I just wanted, for clarity's sake, so these thresholds, so below 4 hectares, from 4 to 7.9 hectares up to 5 units, and then above 8 hectares up to 10 units, is that drawn from another document, or? Yeah, just right there.
Okay.
It'll be in the next slide.
Oh.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
coming up,
we're-
7.
Oops.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I?
Yeah, we're
miss-
going to talk. No, we're just going to talk about it in the very next slide.
Sorry about that, you guys.
It's all good. You're definitely on it. We will get to that. Okay, so just to go back to the 3.1, a motion has been put on the floor. Oh, Alex, did you want to just, yep, go ahead and add your point. Oh, you're still on mute.
Sorry, guys, I keep doing that. So I've got the ALR use regulation pulled up on the other screen here, and it's 10 sleeping units is the total cap. So that would be a bedroom or a yurt or something, but each sleeping unit is typically 2 guests. So you're looking at 20 people total is what that would accommodate. Okay.
Stefan, do you still have your hand up? Do you want to make a comment, or was that? Okay, you're good. Okay, so as this recommendation goes, can we move forward with this one, or is there any objections to this, or do we need to make any clarifications about? Or there's not much more I think we can do at this point. But Do we have any, remind me, did I get a seconder on that? Yes, I got Ralph. Do we have any nays? Okay, we can move forward with allowing, with the staff recommendation and go on to the density. So density provisions, here's where Stefan was talking about with the number of units based on the hectares of the farm. So under 5 acres, which is 4 hectares, no, 10, right? 10 is 4. I wrote this down somewhere. No, it's, and then 4 to 7.9 is up to 5 units, and over 8 is up to 10 units. Go ahead, Sue.
I just need some clarification. So is agritourism the same thing as having a B&B, or is it different?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so I can speak to that. That's what I was trying to get on the previous slide there. They're different things. So they're separate, considered separately. B&B is already a permitted use, so we're going to be maintaining that. And then the recommendation is to also allow for agritourism accommodation. But if you have a B&B and you have 4 sleeping units already that you're operating under your B&B use, the total cap for both uses is 10 in the ALR use regulation. So you would only have up to room for 6 agritourism accommodation units in addition to your bed and breakfast. Does that clarify, Sue?
I think so. I'm just trying to understand the concept of having none on a 10-acre farm. Like if you're 10 acres or less, you can't even have 1 tourist accommodation. I just question that in terms of, is that appropriate for our area, given, you know, the types of agriculture, the types of opportunities here. So you're more discussion.
Yeah, and so that means that it doesn't make any sense to me either, because if B&Bs are already a permitted use, you're just saying you can't add on to that. You're not able to diversify. Is that kind of
that's my concern too. Yeah. Thanks, Jackie.
Okay, so the under 4 hectares sounds like we would like to have the ability to diversify, because 4 hectares, it's still a big area. Does anybody else have any comments or on that?
Just that smaller parcels tend to be located in less feasible agricultural land in the first place. So limiting
They need more.
the ability to try to take on these different income streams might not make the most sense, but
Yeah, that, especially in our area, it seems the ones that are perched on the hill and have a tiny bit of ALR on them. Will Shaw, you have your hand up.
Just curious how this relates to the recommendation that was already put forward, that secondary farm uses only, or residences only be allowed on parcels 4 hectares or bigger. To me, having 0 aligns with that. That's where it makes sense. Like, if not, we're just contradicting what was already passed as a recommendation. At least how I interpret it.
Okay, thanks. Well, that does make sense. Alex?
Yeah, I think just to echo what Will just said, that was the thinking on staff's end behind having 0 for under 4 hectares, is that was aligned with the other recommendations that were being brought forward.
Okay, but also just to point out, a secondary, a secondary place is definitely, the footprint of a yurt is definitely different than that, and it can be temporary. But Sue, you had your hand up.
Oh, I just want to say thanks for the clarification. Yeah, I don't know what to say other than, okay, that makes sense to me too then. If it's about the secondary residence, but not necessary if it's some kind of temporary camping, like, I don't know.
Stefan?
yeah, I think just Will makes a very good point, that it does seem somewhat contradictory, but, given that is not an avenue, that being the secondary home, that is available to smaller property owners in our area, particularly where most of those smaller properties are less tenable for farming in the first place, that trying to keep some kind of an avenue open for some kind of an income stream there, I think would be a good step.
Thanks, Stefan. I see your hand, Claire. Go ahead.
The only, I just wanted to add to, for consideration, just discussion purposes, is that specifically for agritourism accommodation, and this isn't anything the SOD has jurisdiction over, is that there is the requirement for farm status. So that may have impacts depending on the size or the activities that is a requirement, no matter what, basically.
Go ahead, Vivian.
I'm having trouble pushing the buttons today. Thank you. I just wouldn't want to limit agritourism in Area B in any way. It just seems like, you know, a bright possibility in our future. And I've said that a number of times already, so I'll just say it again in this section. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to propose that under 7.9 hectares that we allow up to 5 units, and over 8 hectares we allow up to 10 units, and put it out there to see what people think. Rolf.
Yeah, I'll support that. I think that makes sense. That's
Okay, I'm willing to put a motion out there to set the density provisions for agritourism use to under 7.9 hectares, up to 5 units, and over 8 hectares, up to 10 units being our recommendation. Oh, and before I go forward, Will.
Just with you, I guess it's a question on that motion. Are you opening, or is that going to open the SLRD up for bylaw complaints when, oh, I'm going to build a 1-bedroom Airbnb, which I'm allowed to because it's, or agritourism unit, and my children are going to stay in it for 28 days straight, and then they're going to go stay in a hotel, then they're going to stay in it 28 days straight. Like, to me, I think I'd like to see it aligned with the previous recommendation, keeping it consistent. If not, this just seems like it's giving a loophole for people to have a secondary residence that they're not claiming as a secondary residence, but that's really aggravating their neighbors and is now going to become a complaint issue. That's just my thoughts.
Okay. Yeah, fair. Thank you very much. We our Area B is yeah, the neighbor complaint issue can occur, but it's a little bit different than the city. Stefan.
Just to your point there, Will, I don't know that you can actually construct a permanent structure on the basis of having the units available to you, agritourism units. I don't think.
Does staff have, yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so to that point, technically, the way it's defined in the ALR use regulation, the sleeping unit for agritourism accommodation says it may be either a bedroom or other area used for sleeping located in a residence, cabin, or other structure, or a vehicle, trailer, tent, or other structure located on a campsite, field, or other area. So the infrastructure associated with it could technically be more permanent in nature, but the accommodation is meant to be seasonal or short-term basis.
And it's very small. I mean, and the majority of those structures are non-permanent. Okay. Stefan?
Sorry, yeah, I just found it. It's in the agritourism activities in the ALR, amended April 2019. that permanent facilities must not be constructed or erected for any agritourism activity. So just.
Okay, Ralph?
Yeah, I do see sort of the issue Will's outlining where, because there's no gross floor area defined for agri-tourism accommodations and that sort of stuff, you may create some issues around this this issue, and where people may construct something and a structure of some sort and use it as a secondary residence while they claim it to be a agri-tourism accommodation. And so maybe
Are you
it is
sort of
better.
going to?
Maybe yeah. I guess I'm sort of going back to staff recommendation to say under 4 hectares. There is where maybe we can amend it and say, listen, under 4 hectares, we can expressively say that there's no structures that can be construed to be anything more than temporary, and therefore it cannot have cannot be hooked up to power, cannot be hooked up to sewer, cannot be hooked up to water, and therefore it is indeed a very temporary thing where it's a yurt, or it's a where there cannot be that permanent residence under the guise of an agritourism accommodation. So can we put something to under 4 hectares to make sure that it doesn't become something like a secondary residence? Is there a way to do that?
Alex, do you have some answers for us? Because that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I think that's a great approach for those smaller parcels, is to have something written into the zoning bylaw that you are allowed those units, but they have to be temporary in nature. So just,
And
yes,
just
we
leave
can
out
definitely,
yeah,
we can do that.
just leave out the power and stuff. I think that I get where you're going with that, Ralph, but I think that they can be temporarily hooked up to things and then taken away if that works. So as long as it's the temporary, non-permanent, all that kind of stuff, and preserves agriculture land should it exist under where it is. Okay, so the motion, because we are really nearing 12, we're at 12 right now. So I would like to, it looks like we're not going to get on to 4.1, and then we'd have we have two more to do, I think. Okay, so let's do this one. Let's finish it. So basically under 4 hectares that we would propose up to 5 units, but are specifically temporary and non-permanent. And then we would leave the rest of the staff recommendations as is. Do I have a seconder?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Thanks, Sarah. Do we have any objections? Okay, hearing none, I just want to check in with the committee members, knowing that we have, we are supposed to be finished our meeting, and check in with staff because we have 2 left. We have the size of the production facility, and we have the parking provisions left. Is it possible to have another 15 to might be 30 minutes? Or should we leave this to the next meeting? Claire and Alex, go ahead.
I can stay on. I have another meeting at 1 o'clock, but I'm available until then. And I think from staff standpoint, if there's any way to get through this today, that would be great, just so that we can get the bylaw moving forward and a draft in front of the board and then back to the AAC as well.
I'm proposing, depending on the rest of the committee, that we only stay on till 12:30 and see what we can get done. And knowing that, what is the rest of the committee as availability? You can just put a yay or whatever. Thumbs up.
I'm good.
I'm good.
Yeah, I
Okay.
can stay on.
Okay, let's do her. Let's give her, okay. Alcohol production in the ALR size, the production facility. You can see that the staff recommendation is place regional size limits on alcohol production facilities, tasting room to fall under farm retail sales, consider including lot coverage limit provisions. Alex.
Thanks, Jackie. So I just wanted to preface this discussion with, I think a couple of committee members had asked for information on what other regional districts were doing to limit the size of alcohol production facilities. And so we did do a deep dive and reach out to planning staff at other regional districts. And it looks like for the most part, I would say that they aren't limiting this specific use. So they're not capping the size of the production facility. The tasting room is a bit of a separate issue because that's kind of aligned with the farm retail sales piece. But just to say that staff, since we met last and since this has been brought forward in the past, have kind of, I think we're prepared to do with what other regional or recommend what other regional districts are doing, which is to not regulate this use in that way. There are some lot coverage limit provisions we may still want to look at, but not to set like a specific 500, 600, 800 square meter cap on the production facility. So I think.
Okay,
Thank you.
That's great. That's great information. And thank you so much for doing that deep dive. It really helps. And thank you, Ralph. I was looking to you and Stefan next.
Yeah, I appreciate that context and that research that was done to look at that. In light of the larger lot sizes that we have here, there's potential for large scale grape production. As the liquor licensing has two categories, either commercial winery or land-based winery. Land-based winery requires that production is done on site and cannot be done off site in an industrial area. I think it is highly likely that we will, if there is future development on these lots, that we'll see larger facilities. If you look at the South Okanagan, Burrowing Owl has a 50,000 square feet building producing 45,000 cases on a 145 acre site. And so I would appreciate indeed that flexibility. Sure, there can be lots of things done to ensure that it is done efficiently. At the same time, there's many considerations around these production facilities, including wastewater treatments and other things that need to be done in such a way that the surrounding environment isn't compromised. And so that, with regard to the production facility size, the tasting room, I guess I got a question there because the ALR sets it at 125 square meters indoor and out. The recommendation here is to consider to let it fall under farm retail sales, which in other SLRD electoral areas is limited to 50 to 60 square meters. Sorry. And I guess my question is whether staff is then recommending tasting rooms to be smaller than, or to be limited to 50 or 60 square meters, or that they are recommending it to be no more than the ALR restrictions at 125 square meters.
Thanks, Ralph. Go ahead, Alex.
Okay, thanks. So I'll start with addressing Rolf's question there. So the limits in the ALR use regulation are specifically for food and beverage service areas, which are considered separately from the tasting room. So it's 125 square meters indoors and outdoors. What we're suggesting is, just for the sake of simplicity, have that tasting room, which, as you stated, we've capped at 50 to 60 square meters in other electoral areas, just have that fall under the farm retail sales provisions, which allow for up to 300 square meters. So that would be your tasting room, and any other sales facilities would have to fall within that, that cap. I wanted to make just a couple of other quick points. So with respect to the lot coverage limit provisions conversation, the ALC policy, so it's referenced in the staff report, that document with all the with the greater level of detail. Policy L24 recommends a lot coverage limit of 5% for parcels over 4 hectares and 0.2 hectares for parcels 4 hectares or less. for this type of, for alcohol production facilities, or what they're calling farm-related commercial and industrial uses. And in that case, that lot coverage limit would include all of the kind of associated uses like parking and landscaping in that 5% or 0.2 hectares. So that may be something that the committee wants to look at. And the other thing was whether or not you want to look at provisions, kind of similar to what we were talking about with the footprint earlier, whether you want to look at any provisions for where this can be located on the parcel, or just leave it open to be located anywhere on the parcel.
I'm gonna get comments back, hopefully from Rolf and Stefan on this one, but definitely I think we need to, I like to be consistent because I think it makes sense not to have any provisions about where these are located, that they're located where it makes sense on the property from what Rolf was explaining before. Go ahead, Rolf.
Sorry, find buttons. Yeah, with regard to lot coverage, I understand sort of the logic behind it. I do want to indicate that, and looking again at examples in South Okanagan, is that there's a number of facilities that are like Phantom Creek Vineyards is on a 60-acre site, but it produces wine from about 100 acres additional vineyard land. So it's fairly typical for these facilities to be processing grapes from other properties as well. And so I think that's, it may be commercially more efficient or lucrative to place the facility, including the tasting room, on this smaller parcel because it has highway frontage, while the back parcel, which is a much bigger parcel, it doesn't have any facilities on it because it's just supplying fruit from. So I don't know when that there is a. I think it's very difficult to sort of capture that, because then you'd have to sort of, put some wording in there. It's like, well, if the total acreage farmed, owned by the same company, and it's like, I think it's a sort of a can of worms to define that, but it is a consideration when you start looking at that lot coverage limit. So I don't know exactly how to tackle that. I do agree with the placement or the I forget all the terms, just my brain is mushy, but of where these facilities are located. And I mean, there's lots of considerations of where you want to locate these things, but I'm sure, and I think, the farm, being able to farm and having vineyard land at $300,000 an acre, I think wineries are going to be very resistive of putting this where they could be farming grapes. And but I'm not opposed of having some sort of oversight or direction in that regard.
I think just that last bit that you said is just going to dictate exactly where it's going to go in the most efficient place. I don't feel that I think we just leave it to the experts on the ground. We don't need to put any stuff on, I don't know. That's just my thoughts. Okay, where are we at with this? It says, going back to the recommendation of place reasonable size limits on alcohol production facilities, it sounds like we're moving towards not placing any size limits on the facilities at this time, and that the tasting rooms fall under farm retail sales. I couldn't quite tell if that was did make sense in the end. And then, but the other about including lot coverage limit provisions, just if we could go back to the recommendation again, review. Go ahead, Alex.
Thanks, Jackie. So just to the tasting room piece, again, in areas C and D, I can't remember which is which, but one is 50 square meters and one is 60 square meters for tasting rooms. farm retail sales under the ALR use regulation allow for up to 300 square meters. So the thinking here is that individual landowners can kind of make that decision themselves about how much they want to allocate to different types of retail sales. But it allows for a larger tasting room. It allows for a lot more flexibility than having that capped at 50 or 60 square meters.
That makes sense to me. What about the lot coverage limit provisions? Were we losing those? Sue, go ahead, and then I've got Alex.
Thanks, Jackie. I think I like the idea of leaving the size of the tasting room up to the, whatever that maximum limit is, and the flexibility for whoever is doing the winery. It doesn't make sense to me to say it has to be 50 or 60 meters. It should be appropriate to the facility if you're a business. So I think that shouldn't be restrained. And I agree with you, Jackie. I don't like the idea of putting lot coverage limits in. It's going to cause a lot of extra management and red tape at the SLRD level, and it's not really going to do any. It's going to be based on what's the most efficient thing for the business and the property, I think. So I don't think we need any of these restrictions on the production, alcohol production in the ALR.
I'd second that.
Okay, it's all coming down to really that. We're at 12:14, which would be, I feel like the motion on the floor is to, we're recommending that we are not placing any size limits on alcohol production facilities, that we are allowing the maximum 300 square meters for the tasting room, that there be no restrictions put on the tasting room size and footprint, and that we would not include any coverage limit, lot coverage limit provisions or limitations, I should say. That was clunky, but I think that's the main gist of it.
Oh, sorry, Race.
Go ahead, Stefan. Yeah, go ahead.
Would it be less clunky to make the recommendation that alcohol production be regulated by the ALR use regulation alone?
Yeah, I think that's what we're going for, isn't it? Yep, I think that's what we're going for. All right, I feel like you might have, I can put that out there as a motion.
I'll second that
would
motion.
you be able? Thanks, Ralph.
Can I ask a clarifying question? This is probably directed to Alex. Would that capture the tasting room piece? I'm just trying to figure out, sometimes the definitions, we need certain definitions. Just wanted to make sure we have that addressed in the resolution.
So in order to be fully inclusive, I would probably say the Agricultural Land Commission Act and regulations.
Okay, sounds good. As long as that makes, includes the 300, includes the tasting room. Okay, perfect. Yep. Make it so. Any objections to this? Yay. Okay, moving on. Parking lot and loading in the ALR. Oh, it's my favorite. Okay. Provisions outlining prohibited fill are included in ALR use regulations. ALC recommendation: parking areas for agritourism must not be permanent. Parking surfaces for alcohol production facilities should be permeable wherever possible. And the staff recommends that to include parking provisions for agriculture uses as previously drafted, with the exception of bicycle parking, update surfacing provisions. All right, can we have a little bit of clarification from staff before we, oh, here we go. Okay.
No, sorry, that's.
Go ahead, Alex.
I'm happy to jump in a little bit on this as well. So the bicycle parking piece, I think we're all familiar with that. That was a bit of a sticking point the last time around. So I think right now we're just going to take that out entirely. That was the requirement for a bicycle rack in association with things like alcohol production facilities. With respect to the surfacing requirements, the previously drafted version isn't completely in alignment with the ALR use regulations. So there's a little bit of massaging that needs to be done there to bring those two things into alignment. So the use regulation doesn't allow for any permanent parking, hard surface parking in association with agritourism uses. So given that we're looking at allowing for agritourism, we need to be very clear in the parking regulations that that needs to be, not permanent parking. Needs to be a permeable, like dirt or I think potentially gravel surface. So any agritourism or gathering for event as well. You can't have permanent parking if you're hosting weddings on your property. It needs to not have that negative impact to the agricultural land base. I think that's by and large it. The recommendation in the ALC policy documents regarding parking associated with alcohol production is that it be a permeable surface, which I would also recommend doing, but that can be a permeable asphalt or concrete as well. There's other types of surfacing that would work best for that type of production, and having trucks and that type of thing come in potentially, while still allowing for water to filter through and down into the soil below.
I don't hear any red flags at all in what you're saying. And so when you say include parking provisions for agriculture uses as previously drafted, that's what you're talking about. Okay. Yes. Okay, good. Ralph, go ahead.
Yeah, so we're talking, I guess my clarifying question is, we're talking a lot about parking areas.
Oh, you're still there, or that was it?
Sorry?
Was that it? You were just trying to clarify whether this was just for parking areas, like,
Yeah, or
so
whether
you
it's
might
also
need to-
for roadways.
Oh, we didn't catch that part, for roadways. Staff are nodding. Go ahead, Malice.
Yeah, I can chime in. Yeah, so this would be, it's parking and loading areas. So that would include your roadway into your facility. We would be encouraging, by way of the bylaw, permeable surfacing.
Okay.
And then,
and again, so that's permeable, but it can be
yes.
permanent.
Yes. So where the use regulation digs into this a little bit more is in association with agritourism and gathering for an event uses. So that would be gathering for an event would be something like hosting a wedding. You can't put in hard surface permanent parking for that use. Or if you're doing agritourism accommodation and you've got camping units on your parcel, similarly, you can't put any sort of permanent parking facilities in.
Okay,
and that's, sorry, go ahead.
Maybe I'm just confused. So if I have a retail space and a tasting room, I'm allowed to put permeable surfaces in for my parking space. If I have a loading area where forklifts drive and that sort of stuff, I am allowed to put in permeable surfaces that will allow that traffic to operate more efficiently. But when I rent out my tasting room for a wedding, all of a sudden I'm not allowed to have permanent parking areas.
I mean, so the ALR use regulation speaks to not putting in permanent parking facilities for those gathering for an event and agritourism uses. But if you would already in that case likely have an existing parking lot associated with your tasting room and production facility.
Okay.
So it would just, you couldn't add on additional parking because you're going to host that event, but you could utilize your existing parking with the permeable surfacing.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, and as long as permeable is indeed an asphalt or a concrete, because like I said, a forklift is a essential piece of equipment at a winery, and I can tell you that forklifts don't like gravel.
That's definitely the thinking behind this is ensuring that you don't create a situation where you've got a lot of runoff onto agricultural land coming off of a hard and non-permeable asphalt surface, but that you can have, what is needed to service the production facility, which is a hard surface that's suitable for that type of traffic.
Okay, I'm just not very familiar with permeable asphalt, I guess. That's so it okay.
It's- Just one more thing. If you're driving the Sea to Sky Highway and you go through Lions Bay, that's why that surface, it's suddenly, like if you're driving on a day when it's pouring rain and the surface suddenly changes and there's not lots of pooling water, that's because they've used a permeable surface on that section of the road. So,
Nice.
just a piece of information. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's good to know. Hopefully it's not $1 billion more than regular asphalt, but definitely don't want to create work safe situations when it comes to the forklifts. Ralph, did you have something else or you're good?
No, sorry, I was gonna lower my.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel comfortable at this point going with the staff recommendation and the motion to include provisions as previously drafted with the exception of the bicycle park and then update the surfacing provisions. Is someone comfortable seconding my motion?
I can second it, Jackie.
Thank you, Sue.
Yeah.
And does anyone have any objections? Whew, all right. I think we did it. Of course, we have to see all this in writing. But I am very cautiously optimistic that we have, and I'm very pleased. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Claire. I'm sure you are too. This has been a bit of a process, but very, very important. And we're so thankful for you helping us through all of this. All right. So we are already over, but let's just do a couple of the updates as far as the AAC goes and our membership. Go, Claire.
Really quickly, thanks, Jackie. Just wanted to mention that we do have a call for volunteers out. Applications can be submitted until the end of the month. We already have received a few new applications, so that's great. Please spread the word. We've got lots of space. There's a couple of our existing members that need to renew, but there's plenty of space for new as well. So thanks, and happy to see some more applications come in. And otherwise, I don't have any other updates. So that's good for me. Thank you.
Okay. I think the next steps is seeing in writing what our recommendations from today. And I'm really pleased that this is going forward. And I'll continue to work on the Stadtlium initiatives and help with the wildlife interaction future meeting. And I think that we could actually also look to the Stadtlium Heritage Committee as well as maybe a potential co-host. And I just wanted to thank everyone for staying on for an extra bit to get this through. Are there any final comments from the committee or staff? All right, hearing none, thank you. We're all probably hungry and it's time to go. So I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Okay, I think we got one from Stefan and probably have no objections.
Thanks for everyone's time.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
everyone.
Have a good
Bye.
day.
Claire and Alex, do you want me to stay on for anything? Or are we good?
I think we're good.
Okay,
Thanks so much,
all right.
Jackie. Persevered.
Okay. All right. Woohoo. Thank you. It was awesome.
have
All right.
a good
Talk to you
day.
later. Bye.